Hello and welcome to the Healing Insight podcast, episode 11, with me, Sarah Hunt.
And me, Jez Hunt.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode. And today we thought we'd have a chat about boundaries. I think all of us at one time or another have had our boundaries overstepped or have overstepped other people's boundaries. And that can sometimes cause lots of problems. So, gaining some understanding about boundaries and what they are and how to establish them would might be a useful thing for you to understand.
Absolutely. Boundaries. Letting people get away with things that you're not happy with,
Yes, absolutely.
amongst other
Or
things.
pushing people yourself to try and get something that you want that they're not happy with.
Exactly. Yes, yes, yes.
Boundaries, I feel, are often established or not during childhood, and depending on um, how things are within the family unit, children will learn about boundaries or not, as the case may be. And
Absolutely.
I certainly remember situations with my own children where they would push the boundaries. And my daughter was probably the expert at that. And she would really push and push and push to try and shift my boundaries. And keeping your boundaries in place can be quite a challenge at times. Um, especially if you're in a situation where someone's really pushing you, and it's I guess it's important to always review your boundaries to get an understanding of what feels right for you at this particular moment in time. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think it kind of can boil down to a bit of compromise. Sometimes it's compromise, sometimes it's negotiation in terms of getting a resolution if there's a conflict of some kind. I think you're absolutely right. I think that our boundaries are certainly instigated, set up when we're children. That's how we start to learn about it. Terrible twos, troublesome threes, blah blah blah, all those different things where we're learning what is right, and we're finding our own way in life. Basically, I mean, we've had our parents telling us what to do as a baby growing up, and guiding us, and then we're starting to find ourselves. We're starting to find our own feet, even at 2, 3, 4, 5. Particularly teens, teenage years, definitely pushing boundaries,
Definitely.
as my son currently is, bless him, in a good way. But he's actually not that bad compared to friends of mine who have teenagers of a similar age. So I actually count myself quite lucky.
That's good.
And then as you say, can then go on into adult life and affect us because we can. So where am I going with this? So, for example, where, yeah, so I can think of a client a while back where, and it was around their beliefs as well, but where their boundaries had been overstepped. So, partner not allowing them to be themselves, not allowing them to do their own thing, or causing issues around that, but where it related to their upbringing and the way the parents weren't allowing them to do their own thing. So although she knew it was wrong or didn't feel right, it was wrong for her. She knew that she needed to, and she was unhappy, but she struggled with asserting her boundaries because she never was able to as a child. She was always pushed down by her parents.
Yeah.
They didn't give
And
her that chance to express herself and her boundaries in that way.
absolutely. And then, of course, that what that does is then affect self-confidence and self-esteem.
Self worth, yeah.
And if you're lacking self-confidence, you're lacking self-esteem, you're lacking self-belief, then your boundaries can be very weak. And then people, and certainly my own experience, because boundaries has been a big lesson for me in this lifetime. But what happens then is that the anger and resentment kind of get pushed down, pushed down, pushed down, and the person then finally exerts their boundaries by losing their temper. Which actually, if they're able to feel empowered to say, you know what, I'm not happy with that, and this is why I'm not happy with that. It doesn't work for me. Can we talk about it? Can we look at how that how we can come to some sort of compromise? Then that's a lot healthier than being in this state where you're getting angrier and angrier and angrier because you
Yeah.
just feel like you're being walked over and that nobody's taking any notice of what you really want. And this to me comes back to self-love, self-respect, um, understanding that we need to look after ourselves first, and that is a selfless act rather than a selfish act. And of course, we've been programmed to believe that if we truly love ourselves, if we don't do and put other people first, then we're being selfish. And actually, if we don't look after our needs first and establish self-love and self-respect for ourselves, then that has a huge knock-on effect with everyone around us and the way that we're treated. And then that, of course, comes back to anger and resentment that just builds up until explosion takes place.
Yes. I think another thing that some people can struggle with boundaries is so where they haven't asserted their boundaries, they haven't been had those sorts of conversations, particularly if they're in a longer term relationship, is when they do start to assert their boundaries can also cause conflict because the partner is now going, oh, you've changed, that's not how she behaved or he behaved before, and this is different. And you can find that the other people push back,
Yes.
not in a positive or helpful way, not in a open to, oh, hang on a second, what's going on here, let's discuss this, but in a, well, stuff you kind of attitude. And it can actually then cause difficulty trying to resolve it. So the person can, you can find yourself in a situation where you're just trying to assert your boundaries and you're trying to do it in a nice, kind, loving way, and yet you're struggling to get anywhere because of the state that the other person's at in that moment of, hang on a second, what's going on here, this isn't the person I know, because you're asserting boundaries that you hadn't previously.
Yeah.
But then you can find that you then stop asserting your boundaries because of the conflict that it's causing. So it can be a whole cycle and like a negative spiral of things happening where all you're trying to do is say, that's not right for me. Can we work some compromise or a solution? And I think that actually can put people off, or people can resist asserting their boundaries because of their fear of the conflict that might come from it.
Yes, absolutely. That there often is a lot of fear that's triggered around that, and of course, then as well, issues around communication as well, because the person that is asserting their boundaries, if they're doing it in a loving, kind way, then that's all well and good. But how the other person receives that
Mm-hmm.
may be very different from the way that it's actually meant, depending on what their experiences are, what their points of reference are. And then that may trigger things which adds to the conflict of it. Certainly with children as well, um, it's about them learning what's right and wrong. This is about activating the moral compass. And the moral compass to me is that little voice on your shoulder that goes, come on, that's not the right thing to do. That is not what's good for you. It's not for the highest good of everybody else. You know, you don't need to be doing that or saying that. And on the other shoulder, you've got, yeah, that's good. That's heart centered. That's right for you. Carry on. And, you know, the moral compass to me is really important. And as parents, certainly, you know, our experiences and our moral compass will then have a knock-on effect on our children, and they'll have some learned behavior that comes from the way that we behave, because
Yes,
we're role models for them.
absolutely.
And then they get other role models when they're out in the big wide world, going to nursery and school and things. And so many other different role models, but also they'll see how some children get away with things, and so they think, oh well, if my friend Joe can have that, then I'm going to push my mum to see if I can get that too. And I've certainly experienced that with my children
Yeah.
in the past, where they've pushed and pushed. And I used to keep saying to my daughter in particular, bless her, what part of no don't you understand? Because, you know, and probably that was my fault, in that I would say no, and then stuff would happen, and I would give in, and I shouldn't have given in. And, you know, I've learnt over the years, I'm older and wiser now, about, you know, when you start establishing boundaries, particularly with children, you have to stay there. You cannot waver. You must actually stick with them, and as long as they're for the highest good of everybody, then that's all good. It obviously becomes more complex when you're trying to establish boundaries within an intimate relationship, and I've certainly seen that with, or even with a relationship with a parent or a sibling, or a work colleague. And I've certainly seen it where I've facilitated healing for people, and that shifted and changed them, changed their perspective. They start to have more self-respect. They start to have more self-belief, more self-love. And as you were saying, they start to then try and establish their boundaries in a kind, loving way, and find themselves with conflicts going on. But of course, these conflicts then are just triggering more stuff, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
I've got my air quotes out. That's just coming up to the surface, that needs to be addressed and healed, to allow that relationship to shift and change as it needs to. And when we heal ourselves, it has a ripple effect on everyone around us, and in fact out to the whole population. And it will change the way that people respond to us. And it's so important, if we find ourselves in a situation where there's conflict, because we're trying to establish the boundaries that are right for us at this moment in time, that we need to go inward when that conflict happens, and see if there's something that we need to address that will change that situation, and soften it, and allow better communication. And so the ability to actually establish the reasons why you want to put those boundaries in place, why you want to make sure that they're clear, and that then will help to the other person to heal, and help them to have more clarity, and see that it's not a slight against them. It's just that you have more self-respect and more self-love now.
Yeah. I think it's important to also not be scared of conflict. And what I mean, in okay, it depends on what level the conflict is. If it's physical abuse against you, if you know, depending on what the situation is, if you're being physically abused when you say stand your ground about your stuff, then maybe that's a slightly different scenario from where I'm coming from in this particular moment. But not saying something and not asserting your boundaries just because it might cause an argument, I think is it's not doing you any favors. But that argument is because you've got two people who have differing opinions, who are just trying to find their own. So each of you is trying to assert your own boundaries. Each of you is trying to find what the resolution that you're looking for from that situation. So it has to be compromise. It has to be a negotiation or a talk about where's this actually going? How am I going to get what I want and you get what you want, or as close to that as we possibly can?
Mm.
And I think people can get put off from even having that kind of discussion because of the perceived conflict and the energetic side of the energy that comes from that. Because, argument energy is not a nice energy, it's not a pleasant energy to be in.
No, absolutely. And a lot of people don't like conflict and don't know how to deal with conflict.
Mm,
I think that's probably part of it, um, and don't want to be drawn into a big argument. And if there's an argument, to me that's drama, and that's a big indication that the people involved both need to go inward
yes.
and look at what's going on, what's been reflected to me, why am I angry? Why is the other person angry? What is it that I need to address that will allow us to be able to communicate in a more loving way about the situation so that both our needs are met within the situation? Um, and I think it's really important to understand that, whenever we end up in conflict, it's highlighting to us that there may be something that we need to address. And of course, it's important to understand as well that we're all different. We've all had different journeys, and we all have valid opinions. And I remember trying to establish boundaries with our parents when I was in my 40s, and it was really quite difficult. And it was. But it was something that was really necessary. And I remember having a conversation with Dad and saying to him, um, my opinion is valid. It's just different to
Yeah.
yours, and that's okay. I still love you, but we need to understand that each of us is looking at it from a different perspective, and that's okay. So that kind of shifted things a bit, because suddenly it was like, oh, okay, yeah, you've had different experiences to me, and therefore you've got a different perspective, and so you are going to look at things differently from me. And I think that's something that's quite important for people to understand, is that when you're in a situation of conflict, it's very easy to dismiss the other person's opinion.
Yes.
And that then takes self-worth away from that person. And that then just kind of chips away at their own self-respect, their self-love. When you can say, okay, and this kind of goes to the we agree to disagree, doesn't it? Kind of thing. But when you validate somebody else's opinion and say, okay, yeah, that you've got a valid point there. I don't agree with it, but I accept that it's a valid point. You're not taking self-worth away, and so you're allowing you're allowing the communication to happen on an adult level.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think we all have opinions. We all have our own map of the world. We all have our own view of things. And my view of anything that I have a view on is no more or less important or right than anyone else's view of the same thing. I mean, their view of the thing will be based on their upbringing, like we said, the moral compass, the experiences they've had, and just their map of the world and where they are with life. Doesn't make them wrong. It just means that they have a difference of opinion, a differing opinion, which creates the
Absolutely.
difference of opinion. And I think, whatever it is, whatever relationship, connection with a person it is just understanding that they're not wrong. That's just how they view things. But
Yeah,
you're right.
it's their truth,
Yes,
and and
yes,
and our truth changes as we evolve and as we heal and as we show ourselves more self-love and self-respect, we will find that our truth changes, our moral compass changes, and that's all part of growing as a person and as a spiritual being.
Yeah, as we gain understanding, things, what we believe as a child, you might believe one thing, and then you find out that actually it's not that when you're slightly older. It doesn't mean that it was wrong at that particular time. You believed it to be true.
Hmm.
Now you've got understanding because of something you've learned or something that's been told or something that you've experienced that now shows that not to be true. So now it's not true for you. Doesn't mean it was wrong. It was just that's how it was with the knowledge and understanding you had at that moment.
Yes, absolutely. And that's, something as well that I've drawn on many occasions is that everybody is doing the best they can
Mm-hmm.
with the knowledge they have at that particular moment in time. And different people have different levels of knowledge according to where they are on their healing journey and on their soul path as well. So that can have quite an influence on how people are able to resolve things with each other and how they're able to communicate and how they're able to what understanding they're able to have of the other person's perspective to be able to look at things from different angles.
Yeah. I think it's also stepping back from ego. I think a lot of
Yes.
conflict comes from so it is that, well, I'm right. I'm right. So sorry, but you're wrong. And that's it. End of argument. And
Yeah.
that's just not right.
No, absolutely. And to be fair, one of the things um, that I used to do, particularly with my children, was if there was conflict because I was putting boundaries in place, I would actually say to them, right, go and calm down. When you've calmed down, we'll have a conversation about it. And when you get into a conflict, if there's an argument going on, it's not the best time to actually be trying to resolve the conflict.
Yes.
You actually need to take that step back to actually move out of your head, because when ego is stepping forward and taking over, that's you in your head rather than in your heart. And when you take that step back, allow yourself to calm down, allow yourself to look at, why am I being triggered here? You may not need to deal with it right there and then, just try and get an understanding of why you're being triggered.
Yeah.
And then you can actually have a more heart-centered approach to conflict resolution with the situation, and an understanding and some kind of compromise that meets the needs of the all parties involved.
I think that's an important reminder is that we can only go within and change within anyway, and that is, regardless of whether it's a boundaries conflict or any other conflict or any other thing that triggers us, the first place to go is within. Okay, why has that triggered me? And whether someone uses journaling or meditation or just reflection, but just start with, okay, so why has that triggered me? What is it that's grating about that? Because that then gives you the place to start in terms of self-healing, self-understanding, self-appreciation, whatever it might be, to then be able to start moving forwards with some form of resolution or process of resolution or line of resolution that you can then move forward with to then try and work out a compromise with the other person.
Yes, absolutely. Um, and I think that's something that's just really important for everyone to remember, is that we can't change anybody else. The only person that we can change is ourselves. And when we take that time to go within and understand what's triggering us and do something about it and change that, it changes the energy of everything. And then that changes the energy of those around us that we're connecting with.
Yeah.
And something or a behavior that you've seen in somebody will disappear. And the reason it's disappeared is because you're not putting the energy out that was creating that behavior, which was to draw to your attention that something needed healing.
Yeah. if you've changed your behavior, then that's not going to trigger the other person in the
No,
same way as it did. So therefore, that conflict or that issue may not arise again. So yeah,
that's
that
it,
makes sense.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Ah, this is an interesting one.
It is an interesting one, isn't it? Yes, it just brings to our attention, I think, that our journey is all about people helping us to understand ourselves. And our greatest teachers are the people that irritate us the most,
Yeah,
because they're the ones that are really flagging up issues that we need to look at. And if we can actually recognize that they're our greatest teachers, and just put some subconscious thanks out to them, because without them crossing our paths, we wouldn't have the opportunity for the growth that is offered to us when those people actually connect with us and trigger stuff in us.
yeah,
Does that make sense?
yeah, yeah,
And I've always been very grateful for for my relationship with our mother. Bless her. She and I clashed an awful lot, and probably because we're quite alike in a lot of ways. But I recognise her as one of my greatest teachers. And as I healed, our relationship healed, so that before she passed over, I had a much better relationship with her than I'd had for the rest of our time on the planet. And I'm very grateful for that, because she taught me so much about myself, and she taught me so much about what I needed to do by going inward and recognizing stuff. And I didn't really start to understand that until I was in my 30s.
yeah,
But once I did understand it, it was like, oh, hang on a minute, what's going on here? I need to look at this. So do remember that everyone that really irritates you is there to help you to grow.
yeah. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to learn to grow. Exactly. It's that looking at it and looking at it for what it is. And I think there's also, I think this is actually just a general human trait. Is it's very easy to just assume or to blame somebody else external to you, and to immediately go down the you're the problem rather
Yeah,
than they are the problem, sorry, rather than, okay, maybe there's something about me that irritates them that's causing them to react in that way, which is then irritating me. And as we've rightly said in various episodes so far, the only thing we have control over is how we react or respond to something, or what we choose to do about ourselves. I can't make someone change. I could try and influence their change by being aggressive, being not, there's different ways I could try and influence how someone reacts or responds to me. So forcing them to bend to my will, or whatever But actually, I can't make them. If they choose not to, there's nothing I can do to make them. So the only person I have control over, in truth, is me.
absolutely. And the thing is, when you change you, it
It ripples.
ripples out
Yeah.
and changes other people. Um, I wanted to just to where you were saying about pointing outside of yourself and saying you're the problem, and I think that's quite pertinent for boundaries as well, because if somebody hasn't got boundaries in place, and they feel like somebody is stepping over them, and this is kind of often where they end up in this situation where they explode, because they've taken enough. I'm sick of being walked over by you.
Mm-hmm.
And they're pushing that out onto the other person, instead of actually looking and saying, okay, why are they overstepping my boundaries? Have I not got them firmly in place? Are they actually correct for me at this particular moment in time?
Yes.
And recognizing that actually the reason that somebody is overstepping your boundaries is because you haven't established them and made them clear to them. And 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 often people who are a similar frequency to you will pick up on your boundaries on a subconscious level. But they may not always, and that's something that I kind of learned. I have learned over the last few years, in particular, is that um, I kind of put my boundaries out there, and I didn't always make them really clear on a
Yeah.
conscious level, because I could pick up on other people's boundaries, I assumed wrongly, never make an assumption. I assumed that other people did that as well. And not everybody's able to, and that's okay. That's where they are on their soul journey. Um, so I've I've had to learn to actually consciously make it very clear where my boundaries are with some people, that have crossed my path and been on my journey, whereas others have known straight away that if they said something or did something that would be crossing my boundaries. So I think it's very important, and this is something that we have to do with children, is to actually make it very clear what the boundaries are, and stand by those boundaries once they're in place, so that they understand that what happens if they cross the boundary, that there's some kind of consequence that needs to be addressed, something that needs to be looked at, to understand that no, that's not acceptable.
Yeah.
um does that make sense?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
but
Yes.
but I think sometimes people have their boundaries in place, and they haven't made them clear because they're clear to them.
Yes.
And so they're not clear to anybody else in their life, and that then can create conflict, like we've discussed before.
Yeah.
So I think this is yet another topic that we could go on with for quite a long time, but hopefully that's given you a little bit of insight about boundaries and about the importance of going within. So if somebody is pushing your boundaries, then take a step back, have a think, do a bit of journaling, just doing some observation, and see if you can recognize why they're trying to overstep your boundaries. What is it within you that you need to look at that will make those boundaries clear? What is it that you and that other person need to do to address together, to come to a
Mm-hmm.
resolution that is for the highest good, of all concerned?
Absolutely. Yeah. Really interesting. Thank you. That's good. I love a
Okay,
discussion.
good. Yes. Okay, then. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.